Let's take it back. Who is Carmen Rubio? Go back to the very beginning.
To the very beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. So the very beginning is really about family, right? And so my grandparents on my mom's side and are from Durango. My dad's side is from Chihuahua. And they both came over as people coming to work. And so my mom's side my grandfather came over as a bracero. So did my mom's side, different times. And they picked every fruit and vegetable that you can think of in Texas, in New Mexico, in Northern California, and then ended up in Oregon.
What brought up to Oregon?
The fields, yeah, just the migratory pattern that they used to come up. At that point, they used to be in Northern California and used to go back and forth up to North Plains, Oregon, and back to Northern California on my mom's side.
That was your grandparents?
That was my grandparents with my mom and her. There were 11 siblings altogether. Yeah, just typical.
I mean,
and
not enough entertainment on television back then.
Oh yeah, they have stories for days. And my dad's side, they actually didn't come up through California. They came up through New Mexico and then up directly to Washington County. And that story is interesting too, because they lived in a town called Artesia, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And there were recruiters that came from this farm in the Tankersley farm in Washington County. And they went down to Artesia and started recruiting Latino families showing to come pick here, and would show them pictures of ranch homes and say, if you come up, you get a ranch home to pick in our fields.
Was that a real thing?
That was not a real thing. So they got into school buses and then they came up, and of course they were labor camps, right? And so they were like, what the heck is this? And
what year is this?
I can't remember. I think it must have been either late 60s.
Okay, that was definitely post World War II. And
yeah.
For a while.
Yeah, and so they basically were lied to. And so some families who could saved and went back to New Mexico, but some could not afford to. So there is a contingent of families by way of New Mexico that are still in Washington County that have stayed.
Wow.
And my dad's family was one of those families. So, and that's where my parents met. They both lived in the Tankersley camps. So
working.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So most of my family's in Washington County.
How old were your parents back then when they met?
When they met, I think they were in high school, and my mom had to drop out of high school. She was one of the older kids, so she had to
Which
work.
is common for a lot of people.
Yes.
You have to take care of the younger
family. Yeah, younger ones, and also work to give money back to the family. So she dropped out, got her GED at PCC, and was working at a cannery there in the area, and living at home and giving back to the family. And so she was one of the older kids doing that. And my dad was in a band with my mom's little brother. And so
what kind of band?
It was like a rock band, I think. And my dad is a musician, so he's played in all sorts of bands, like conjunto bands, like rock, you name it.
Wherever there's like a reason to play music, he's there.
Yes, and I found some very 70s-tastic photos of my dad, with long hair and like these really interesting outfits. But yeah, so he played a little bit of everything. But my Tío Andy also played the accordion, and my dad played the sax and the drums.
Well, that's cool.
So yeah,
and change.
Yes, yeah.
Your parents meet in high school.
Yes.
In Washington.
Yeah, in Washington County.
Washington County.
Yeah, so Hillsborough
okay.
area.
Got it.
Yeah, North Plains, Forest Grove,
wow.
Cornelius.
Yeah. Which is, for people that don't know where that is, reference to Portland's about 40 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
40 minutes or so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, towards the Pacific.
West. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: you go through that. You go through that experience. You have a system that is not really beneficial to people like us, by that Latino, especially the Latinos that are working in fields and things like that. How did you were what, the oldest or youngest?
I'm the only. Yes.
You're the only.
I am the only one, which is very rare in my family.
Right.
And my parents are divorced, but I grew up with over 30 plus first cousins.
Okay.
So
And you grew up in out there in Forest Grove, Hillsborough.
Forest Grove, Hillsborough.
Gotcha.
North
So
Plains.
take us through that. You as a
Yes.
kid, you're an Oregon
Yes,
child.
I definitely am. So I grew up in North Plains. I grew up in Hillsborough. I grew up in Cornelius and Forest Grove.
What's that childhood like?
We moved quite a bit. It felt normal to me. I mean, I didn't realize it wasn't normal really until I was in my early career in social work. And I realized that was an indicator of housing instability. That freaked me out because I didn't realize that. But it was just a way of life. We moved a lot. And we were always, we were either living with my grandparents or with other tios and tias, or they were living with us, or we take care of that. It was just very fluid like that.
Right.
So I felt I always had family around, always. And my parents were always working, so we were always taking care of each other's kids, things like that.
You go through that childhood. You end up in your one high school, or you go to a few?
I actually, amazingly, just went to 2 schools.
Okay.
I got, I got a scholarship or partial scholarship to go to a private school up until 7th or 8th grade, maybe 8th grade. And
how much of a difference did that make?
oh gosh, a lot, because I was one of very few Latinos in that school. Actually, the only other Latinos were like my older cousin, Loli Dolores, who's like my bestie. And she was in an older grade, and then myself, and then eventually a few grades below some other primos of mine. But there were very few of us. And it wasn't until I was in private school that I learned I was Mexican and that I was poor. I learned it from other kids, and I learned it from the teachers, and I learned it from the kids' parents.
You say there's something that you said earlier that you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. It was only 2 high schools, which to us it doesn't seem that bad. I mean, I hopped around, and it's not that all Latinos follow that sort of stereotypical sad life.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, the fact that you are where you are, and I don't want to get too ahead, is such a statement to your character and how much work it takes for somebody to simply just get through high school, let alone do anything else. So you go through high school. The other part where you do something else, you went to the University of Oregon.
Yes.
Okay.
Went to U of O. So after up to the private school 8th grade, then I transferred into the local high school, Glencoe High School, and graduated from there. And I saw one assembly on U of O, and that's the school I applied to go to.
You applied to one school?
I just applied to one because that's the only assembly I saw. And my mom was really the one that pushed me to think about college and look for scholarships,
right?
Even though she had never gone herself. And it was one other teacher that pulled me out of class once in 10th grade and said, give me your mom's phone number. You don't belong in this class. You belong in a college prep class.
Wow.
And that changed the trajectory. And that had my mom thinking about college for me and me, although my guidance counselors didn't really talk to me about college at all. My mom was the one that really pushed me.
There's a thing now, which is necessary, where a lot of like young Latinos and even BIPOC folk in general use that. They say, I am going to be the first in my family to graduate college or to attend college, and it becomes part of their application essay, right? And it goes a long way for certain places. Back then, I don't think it carried that much weight.
Probably not.
And it probably affected you more, if anything else.
Yeah.
Right? But you managed to go to the University of Oregon. Did you go on a scholarship, or?
I did. Wow. I won a full scholarship to U of O.
What was your?
So amazing.
That is incredible. What was your major?
Political science.
Of course.
Yes. It ended there, though. That's not where I started.
When do you get to the point where you go through school, when you decide, I think I want to be a politician, or better yet, what was the thing that inspired you to public service more than anything before we say politician?
Yes. And I will say too, I never expected to be a politician at all. I was more interested in advocacy, the advocacy side of politics. I thought I was going to be a journalist because I loved to write. I still love to write. And I was taking writing, the basic writing courses, and just very interested in that. Talked to my college counselor about that. But then Mecha found me, or I found Mecha, or whatever. We found each other.
For people that don't know, that's Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, right? Which is there wasn't a lot of groups at one point, but Mecha was the one that really jumps out and speaks to you when you're young.
That's right. And it was one of the only ones, I think, when I was there. And I was a first gen student, and I didn't know anyone. I was very insecure, I think, about being there on campus, and there weren't very many from my school.
What were those insecurities?
I think that, I don't belong here. These are for, a lot of these kids come from families who are rich or, have means. They all know how to navigate. And I was too embarrassed to ask for help sometimes, which got me in trouble.
Which is a very common thing in our community. We're terrible at that. Very
terrible at that. And I think it was doubly and triply for me, just because I did not want to disappoint my family, so, but also it was hard for me to, ask for help up first. But my college counselor, his name was Jim Garcia, and he knew exactly I was, he saw 100 of me, first gen, and he was a first gen in his time. And so he immediately hooked me up with 2 young women who were in their second year, and introduced me to Mecha, and he had me enroll for Chicano Studies class. And so that completely changed, I would say, my life, all those 3 things. And, that group of folks that I met became my best friends, in college, and we're still in touch today. And Chicano Studies gave me a whole new sense of deepening of myself and grounding that I had never felt before in my life, as that I am a part of this country in a very, very important and very old ways. I'm part of the tierra, you know what I mean? And that's the only way I can explain it. Before, I just didn't have a sense of belonging anywhere, because I didn't learn about myself or my history in any of my classes. They don't teach us anything here. And so that's why it was so paradigm shifting for me to take Chicano Studies.
You seem to be going through these milestones, almost like a self-discovery, like this journey you didn't really know that was happening, right? Yeah. You're like, oh, turns out we're poor.
Yeah.
Turns out that there's not a lot of brown folks outside of Forest Grove, right? And you get to that place, and you manage to make it out of that situation. You come out. What is the next chapter after that discovery?
Got politicized, like I said, in college, and I started getting involved in advocacy, took leadership positions in Mecha. It led to me getting involved in student government. And I was drawn to the excitement around, change and policy changes and things that make a difference to make things better in the lives of either students or my community, those kinds of things. So I would volunteer here and there. And then when I graduated and moved to Portland, I was very much drawn to still working in my community in some way. So my very first job was at Milagro Theater. So I worked there for a while, and I had the very fancy title of marketing assistant, which basically meant cleaning the bathrooms, doing the box office, being the receptionist. Right. Yeah, exactly. But it was fun, and I had
one of the 3 jobs that were available for Latinos during that time. The next one being the chamber, but
yeah, I went the Milagro route, and so it was wonderful to work there, and then you get a sense of the city in the late 90s. That I started out there, I think in 99 or something, 98 or 99. And when I was working there, I had to also work as a server, so a wait staff too, to make it work and afford my inner southeast Portland apartments, right off of Belmont, which now I don't know that anybody could afford those, but it was a really, really cool time. And from there, went on to work briefly at a communications agency. And that's when I met Serena Cruz. And she was the first Latina candidate for a Multnomah County Commissioner. And she was running, I think she was barely 30 or just under 30. And I volunteered on her campaign, got super excited about her. And I volunteered so much that she hired me.
What was it that excited you about that campaign?
That she was Latina, that she was young, I think it was even basic as I had never seen a Latina candidate in my life.
How important was that to you back then?
Oh, again, like game changing for me. It showed me what was possible, and it felt hopeful and different and adding some color into an otherwise monochromatic Portland for me. And in terms of leadership, and so it was great. I learned so much, working for her, and I knew nothing about how to be a staffer. It was a whole introduction to a whole new political world that I quickly realized we just were not a part of really at all, in terms of our community.
Right. You go from the theater to the part-time gig to doing this thing. A lot of people don't know that in order to pursue that, when you come from a background like ours, right, that it's a lot easier when you have somebody backing you. And it doesn't seem like there was somebody backing you at the time. No. So you have this, you continue this mentality of I think I'm doing it the right way, but I'm still
floating a little bit.
Yeah,
yes.
very much, right? Yeah. Which we've all, well, not all, but a lot of us, I know I dealt with that all the way till my 30s, right? Where I was just like, cool, I'm working twice as hard to be able to have something that people seem to have very easily. And, the security. I started watching a lot of the people that I work with getting co-signed for homes and cars and shit. And I'm like, how do I get one of those rich parents or relatives? But you get to see that. You get to do that. You start working on this thing, still very poor, and or doing better. What keeps you motivated to continue, knowing that there's a big open market for a Latina that has a degree in a town where you could have gone a different route altogether and possibly had that stability? Why did you continue?
I think it excited me because it was just an avenue where I didn't see very many people that looked like us or had the background that we do in those certain areas and spheres of influence. And when I was in college, just getting a little taste of how policymakers have the ability to be part of change and how much effort it took for us to do advocacy to get people to take on our issue and to vote a certain way or introduce a certain bill or pass a certain thing. And the idea that you could just not skip that part, but that you could actually just run someone who is has those values, that does that all the time, instead of trying to convince someone all the time that may not understand, was a really a very exciting idea for me. And the fact that there were some things that, for example, Serena just got because of who she was. I didn't have to explain that much. And that it just made me understand how important representation really was.
Right. Now, at that point, this is when you're like, okay, I think I love this. I think I can continue doing this. And you start working, it gets more intense in many ways, right? What other, not necessarily convinced, but what continued, I should probably ask.
Yeah, how did it, okay. So I continued working for Serena. I learned a lot about this whole, the world of local politics.
And how old were you there?
I was, I don't know, probably mid-20s, somewhere in the 20s.
Child.
And then after doing that for a while, I decided to go to grad school. And so I applied to grad school. And again, I guess I wish I had thought through that a little bit more, but it just felt like it was time. There were other people going, and I felt like, okay, if I want to do something in the future, I probably need a second degree. Again, first in my family to do that at that time.
Right.
I'm not anymore, but back then I was. So started researching grad schools, and I was very interested in political communication or something of that sort. I decided to look at two schools in particular, one at University of Washington and then one at American University in DC. And at that time, this is a different story, but my mother had she had ended up working in DC. So that was an option for me too. And
did that mean you could actually, if you went there, you could stay with her? Or?
Yeah, I could afford to at least live there, but it was a lot more money. And they offered me a partial scholarship, but University of Washington offered me a full scholarship for graduate school. And so I went, but they were two very different programs. The University of Washington was a research program. And I quickly realized, and I think this was my naivete too about grad school, because I had never gone before. And
you just felt that this was something necessary to get to that next
yes.
stage.
And now I know I should have gone to a school that was more of a practicum-based school rather than a research. I entered a program for people who probably were on track to be professors, in other words.
Got it.
Instead of people who wanted to work in public policy,
right?
If that makes sense. So
you'd be a big somebody in DC right now
if I had gone to that one was a practicum. Yeah, that one was definitely very hands-on, and it was a 1-year program, but it was expensive. And I went to UW, and in part because my boyfriend from college also was working out there in Seattle. And so went there for nearly a couple years. I didn't love the program. It was a good program. It just wasn't my speed. I was just much more hands-on kind of person. Very good professors, top-notch, everything. But I just was hungry to roll up my sleeves and do something. And so when Serena decided to run for city council, she called me and asked me to be her field director on her campaign for city council. So I left my program and came back to Portland and became her field director for her city council race.
How did you feel after that?
I felt bad that I didn't finish my program because I was very nearly done, but it felt nice to be back doing something in the field again, and she didn't win. She lost, but I learned a lot more too about city politics.
What happens after that?
After that, let's see. Brief stint, went back working for Serena, who was finishing out her term at the county, and then moved to Seattle for maybe a year or two, something like that, and then moved back. And then when I came back, I jumped into 2 campaigns. One, I ran Lisa Nato's reelection campaign. She was running for county commission, her reelection campaign, it wasn't terribly hard, but she did have a challenger. And then at the same time, Tom Potter was running for mayor, and he was the previous police chief for the city of Portland and had decided to get into the mayor's race. So I was volunteering a little bit on Tom's campaign while I was running Lisa's reelection campaign.
What was the motivation there?
Tom really stood for being very inclusive and bringing more people into City Hall in a way that this city never had before.
Up until that point, right?
Yeah, at all. And
a lot of the conversations that were happening were things that like, when you hear it, you're like, who cares about the brown people? Like,
yeah. Oh, yes. We were not even factored in any way, shape, or form. And if we did, we had to fight our way in to advocate. Or there might be one person in the whole building, City Hall, that might, be Latina or something. But it wasn't ever really a senior policy president. It's just we did not have the presence given commensurate with our population at that time, which was smaller than now, but was still significant and one of the largest, ethnic racial population in the city at that time. But we were just not very represented at all. And so Tom was actually paying attention to our community for the first time, ever in some ways. And so a lot of us volunteered, a lot of our communities of color got behind Tom, and he won. And then he hired me.
That was That was your big break.
That was my big break. Yeah.
What happens there?
So worked for him in community affairs. And so my job was making sure that he maintained and built strong relationships in community, that I represented him in community. But it was a little bit of everything. I staffed him. I went with him places. I helped write, or prepare his, prep information or speeches, some of them. And just did some policy work on things. And that's really what we did.
How much of an influence was that period on you now as commissioner?
It was very formative. I learned how the city works. I learned about the dynamics on city council and how they can be optimally, they can work swiftly and get really big moves going, and also how they can be very toxic if it can go sideways pretty quickly too. So I really learned that when you have such a small council of 5 people, leadership really matters, and the dynamic you bring to the group, the roles influence each other, and that was an interesting time. Tom is a really good man, has deep integrity, and I learned that from him. I learned about keeping your integrity. He did not suffer fools, and he did not. I don't think he enjoyed the politics of it very much. And I understand he was an officer, and he instituted community policing in the city of Portland. So he was very relational and very much collaborative oriented, but at the same time, just kind of a put it on the table, truth teller kind of person. And so in an environment that operates in highly political ways, sometimes those things can sometimes feel challenging or incompatible.
You go through that period, you work that campaign, you continue growing, you take a role, and make sure I have my timeline started. You go from that to I don't have my timelines. What was the next thing you did? I know this one.
After Serena?
Yeah.
After Serena?
No, not Serena.
After Tom?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. After Tom, then he decided not to run again. And I will say during Tom's tenure, that's when he did a lot of really innovative things now that I think back that were kind of bold. But one of the things I remember during that time that he did was that he was the one that really listened to community and tried to champion changing the street name to Cesar Chavez Boulevard. That is its own long story. It was a really hard.
Yeah, there's still people that struggle with it.
Yes.
Just one street, one number. Get over the fucking number.
I know. Sorry. No, it's true. But it didn't even start at that street. It was supposed to be Interstate Avenue, but there was such a backlash, and just the enormous backlash and the racism and all the things came out of the woodwork for a street renaming.
Right.
It was, I think it caught all of us off guard because we did not expect that kind of but it
was, I feel like Portland at that period was very forthcoming with how racist it was. I think this just made it easier for them to have something to be racist about because.
Yeah, it was just very, but it was, I think, and this is something that became an eventual, that it maybe seems like a theme for me, is I think I was naive about, now we're in this role. I work in City Hall. I work for a mayor. These kinds of experiences are not, people know better when you get to these kinds of jobs. And then you're like, no, they don't. This still racism still exists in these. We're still going to see these things. And I think each time I move into a different position, I still have that naive belief that maybe those people know better, that I'm not going to experience.
Where do you
those
think
things,
that naiveness comes from?
I think it comes from hope, and I think it comes from, the belief that, the hopeful belief that we're all at that point in time together for the same reason. And that's not always true. We have different motivations and we're different people. And yeah, that's just the truth.
After that, now take me to the next role.
Okay.
That was the big one, right? What was
Tom.
your big? Yes.
Yeah. So after Tom, he decided not to run again. And then Nick Fish got elected. And Nick, someone had left, I think, midterm. And so he won that election and he offered me a job. And so I moved from Tom's office to Commissioner's office, Commissioner Nick Fish, who then became a very long-term serving commissioner until he passed away. And so I worked for Nick, not too long, but long enough to learn some things from him too. And he truly was a statesman. He was the son of, I believe, a congressman from New York, and or a politician in New York. I'm not sure if it was a congressman, but he also worked for a congressman, and he just loved the role, and he loved Portland. He was from New York, but he just loved all things Portland. It was truly epitomized, a Portland cheerleader and champion, and was very had a lot of grace, was someone who was seen as able to navigate high stakes situations and still keep relationships intact. And so I learned those things from him, seeing him.
Every time that you go
way.
through one of these roles, you go from one to another and just like, I'll take that skill.
Yes.
And as you tell me these things, because I feel like I get, knowing you, I have a lot more access to seeing that and seeing you at work. And little by little, it's not just like you're just coming up with these, it's like a collection of all the greatest hits from what we in the last 20 years.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so Nick, was great in that way. And he was also always someone that stayed in touch with me when I left his office. I left his office because some leaders in my community came to me and said, this nonprofit is struggling. We're going to lose yet another nonprofit. They're going to close their doors that are, that is supporting the Latino community here. We had lost our longest running nonprofit in Portland called the Oregon Council for Hispanic Advancement about 3 years prior.
When you say lost,
they closed their doors because of funding issues and organizational issues, and it was a devastating loss. And it was an organization that they had an alternative school, they had violence prevention programs for young people, they had workforce programs, they had an arts and culture. They were just, very vibrant nonprofit organization that was the go-to organization for our youth and families at the time. And so when they closed their doors, it was a blow to the state, really. And there was a vacuum of services for Latino families and youth in schools. And the next significant organization we had was Latino Network, and it was very tiny and new at the time.
Right.
And the founding director had left a few years prior, and they couldn't sustain a director.
There was a lot going on.
Yes, and so it was like not solid yet with with leadership, and so
What made you want to take that job?
I don't know. I think part of it was Obama had just gotten elected.
Oh, you were
right?
hopeful.
And and I felt, I also felt somewhat like, okay, I am one of very few people of color and one of two Latinas like in City Hall. And I now had all this knowledge and tools about how we were not at the table. And my job before working for Tom and working for Nick was like when something big was coming up to encourage community to come. You guys need to be here. You need to testify. What do you think about this? Like get in on this now because the decisions are going to be made without you, And so that was my, part of my role to engage people into the policy making process or whatever issues we're developing. We needed to make sure that we got stakeholders from multiple communities. And so with OCHA gone, and they were a big resource to bring people in, and they were gone. And so we had just Latino. I was just seeing dwindling places for our community to have that, have those political social centers of engagement. You know, it seemed to not be as present as we needed to be,
Right.
in order for us to build political power. And so I was worried about that we were not building.
But can I ask you this?
Yes.
You saw that, and it's not like the golden opportunity. It's an opportunity to do great for your community. And maybe you see something bigger, but then there's this whole other side where you could have gone to a different sector and just had a lot more stability in your life.
Yes.
Why did you choose this over the other thing?
I think I just am always called to that kind of service and activism, just building power in community in whatever role that I had, whether I'm on the government side or whether I'm, on the community side. And I had never really worked on the community side in a nonprofit before as the leader of the nonprofit building, a program. And so I did that more, one, because my elders told me I needed to. They were basically like, you need to do some time in the community now. They very bluntly told me that. And two, because I knew that we needed some political presence and we needed some social presence and cultural presence for our families that live in this community. So that's why I did it.
Tell me, how long were you there?
11 years.
11 years. So those 11 years, give us, because we knew where it started and what was happening. And we know how you left it when you were done with it, right? Which you could look back and be like, I did that, right? What was it that you did that I think most Latinos here in Portland, whether you're new to this place or you've been here long enough, you should know the impact that you had. So what were those things?
So when I started, the organization had maybe, a handful of staff, maybe less than 10 staff, and an operating budget of about 550 approximately. They were operating out of a very small house that we rented from a church, and they did really good organizing work around certain issues that were important to the community. And they had really good beginnings of programs, and they were very earnest, very intentional, very, very culturally responsive. So the quality was excellent, and very, programs that had dignity for people and also acknowledged the reality of how people live and work in this community and their lived experience. But we did not have that to scale. It was, and we also were living program to program or grant to grant. And it never had the opportunity to take root in a way that could actually, you could scale that impact for many, many more families so that they could take advantage of that kind of growth and develop their civic skills and understand how to navigate on behalf of their families and self-determine their own lives. So that's what became the mission, was to build an organization that was stable, that was not only an organization for the community, but our employees are part of the community too. And so it became like a learning organization, a leadership organization. We had a lot of young people who came through and now are doing amazing things, either at that organization, they're like now directors, or they've gone on to amazing, amazing things. And so by the time I left, we were operating in 3 counties. We opened up one of our early childhood programs, or replicated a program in Central Oregon. And we had a staff of over 140 at that time that I left, and an operating budget that ended that year, or the revenue that we took in that year was, I think it was $18 million.
So when you look back at that, and by the way, when did you finish that? When did you leave?
I left when I got elected to,
right.
Yeah.
Which
so
we're gonna go into, but when you look back, what is the big thing that you take? What is the big one that you say, I did that?
I think that we built an organization that actually builds power in community, and that has a direct impact on people's lives and livelihoods, and that has political presence in this state.
Right. Amazing. Moving forward, it's 2020, more specifically November 2020. Really strange time. We got the pandemic happening. We have these national elections that are, strange to say the least. And here you are with all this hope that you seem to bring to every role, to a city that this is where the wounds started to really open up, right? Because you have this perfect match of a city that's expanding way too fast, in my opinion, and all the pandemic and all the effects that it had, and you get elected for this role. And I'm sure you're excited. You're like, can't wait to get into the office and get shit done. But then there's no office to really go to, right? Yeah. What was that feeling like?
It was a deep sense of loss, I think, about the celebration of coming into that office. Because suddenly we couldn't be together in community. So it felt very isolated. And I got elected in the primary. So in May is when
in May, not November.
Yeah, I won outright in May.
Which is even more strange.
It was strange because it was so early. And then I had several months, definitely to get ready to transition out. But also it was right after I got elected in May that everything happened,
Correct.
And so and when I finally got sworn in, for that next year in 2021, I had to do it by myself. There was it just felt very quiet, and there was just so many bigger issues happening that it almost felt like, is this really happening? And, all our meetings were over Zoom,
right.
For the first, several months of my term. So we just started in an awkward way.
You become commissioner in, like I said, the strangest time, in my opinion. But also, I feel like you were, and this is, I guess, collectively for everybody, this is the hardest 4 years that Portland has faced in a long time.
Yeah.
Right. And when you look at it, you think about the city where it's at right now. You think about, I could make a list here from the possible 800 houseless shelter, or not even shelters, just camps that exist in the city. The crime rate doubling nationally, one of the highest. You got almost 15% in state and local income tax. You have a lot of shit that's happening that is making people want to leave this place. So they say, right? This is the kind of talk from, the Fox News of the world, the even the New York Times, who's made it a point to write about all the bad things that happen. And now you're going into a role that is knowing all this stuff. You are attempting to be the first Latina mayor of this great city at this time. Why?
It's a really good question. I come into this race absolutely knowing, with my eyes open, all of the challenges that are here. And that's why I'm doing it. That's, really why. It's hard. And I never expected to be in this role. I never even expected to run for office, to be frank with you, because I always saw myself as someone behind the scenes that was just the hard worker, that I supported good leaders. I didn't really see that for myself. And it was really Commissioner Fish that pulled me aside one time and told me to think about it. And when I did that, when I decided to get into that role and run for office, it took me a while to shift my mind from being a staffer into an actual elected leader, I believe. And I do think that when I was in this role and started actually getting some successes and seeing that I know how to do this stuff, like I've seen my prior bosses do this, but I'm pretty good at this. I actually know how to build coalitions with people. I know how to play the different roles that have to shift to bring people along and get the votes I need to pass something, So I enjoy doing that. I enjoy finding common ground. I enjoy problem solving and finding solutions. I even enjoy the high stakes conversations sometimes that we have to take to get there. But being mayor was a whole different thing. It was a whole different ballgame. You see how much scrutiny they're under, how much they're attacked, how much they're criticized, their leadership, every aspect of who they are. So that was the last thing I ever wanted to do. And I am remembering those things now. But aside from that, the reason I decided to get in is because seeing folks get into the race after, Mayor Wheeler decided not to run, I was waiting to see someone that I could get excited about. And I didn't see anybody that I got excited about. And then I started to get worried for the city. And then I realized I can do all these things. I have
you have the track record to this point.
That's right. I have the track record.
I don't think people really understand how far that goes, right? And the people that you work with along the way to get to this point that you're in. My big beef with this city right now, one is that they're calling this a two-person race, which you have this like multiple choice vote thing that's being introduced, right? And then you have this topic of a two-person race, and with the two-person race, you have and I don't want to get into the negatives and my opinions on your opponent, right? But I feel like he's gotten the easier path by simply being vocal about the things that are wrong with the city.
Yes.
And saying, I'm going to fix, not telling people how he's going to actually do it, right? But just focusing on just the red meat that a lot of the folks that have ran this city, when I say ran, the owners, the people that were very successful up into the pandemic, that feed off of, because they want to have that success back. And there's so much bravado that exists with that it's not even brought up to question.
Yeah.
So my question is, why aren't you using that bravado?
That's a good question. I think part of it is cultural. I was always raised about how important it was to have humility. Always raised to respect your elders. All these things that are very essentially Mexican good manners, really. That's how I was raised. And so suddenly I'm in this profession where I am being told to do all these things that are very anathema to the way that I was raised, right? And so part of it, that's just not me to do that. I have been trained and I have been mentored to be a team player, to be collaborative, and to lead as well, but don't brag about yourself, you know? And so that is a shift for me. I'm learning how to do that more. But there's a part of me that rejects that too, because it's a very gendered, very
I was going to say,
white
it's a very
vision of leadership.
I feel like, and again, my personal opinion and my personal feelings are very different, but I do see it, and I think a lot of people see that you get treated different. The way that you speak about certain things and the things that you've been vocal about goes under scrutiny a lot more. And I think most of it is because, like, even when I have these conversations with some of the people that I love dearly in this town, they're like, yeah, I like Carmen a lot. She's my second choice. But there's never really a logic behind it other than the fact that, like, all of it feels very much like, what is this? Is it the sex or is it the race?
That's right.
And I feel like there's so much of it that exists right now.
There is. I think that I don't think there's a recognition of it. And it's not something that as a candidate I have the luxury of pointing out. And so my best asset, I think, is when people get in a room with me and they can actually learn who I am. And when they do, I do believe that I win people over, not because of force of personality, but because I talk about things that matter and they see the work that I've been doing actually hopefully in many ways intersects with things they care about and their lives. And I just get results, and it's not I'm doing it to impress you. I want to make life better here in Portland for all of us.
Right.
And trying to problem solve for all of us. And And that is where, yes, it has felt like a disadvantage sometimes, because I feel like in the construct of how political campaigns go, just through time and history, the job interview of a campaign is very different than the job. And the skills you need for that job interview of the campaign, to me, seem very different skills. They can be helpful skills to the job, but they're very different skills than what you need to actually get things done.
What kind of leader do you think the city needs right now?
We need a leader who is focused on Portland and not themselves. We need a leader that is in the city with Portlanders, with people, someone who's not afraid of the city and who doesn't stoke fear about our city. We need a champion for Portland, but we also need someone who's going to hold our partners accountable so that we all hold up our end of the bargain in ensuring our systems work for everybody. If we're constantly just pounding our fist, that's just one note. That's not going to actually change anything. You need a tool belt of different skills. You need to be a ninja. And we don't have enough ninjas here in Portland. We just have people who are loud.
We do have a lot of loud folks.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, and we'll wrap it up, but one of the things that's driving me kind of crazy about this campaign is that, yes, we're aware of the things that are happening outside, but we're also aware of the things that are changing just because things need to change, right? My big beef with most of these candidates is that I don't feel, and this is other people that I've spoken with, we don't feel like we hear enough of like the big vision for the future. And I know that everybody has their plan as to how they think they're going to fix the fentanyl crisis, the bringing people back to the offices in downtown. But anything. Tell me that you're going to build a bridge somewhere to nowhere, but at least it's some sort of a vision, something that's big, right? I feel like the city was built on at least in the last 20 years, on a lot of that big thinking.
Yeah.
What is your big thinking?
So my big thinking is definitely, I love the idea of re-envisioning our downtown. I love the idea of actually creating housing for everyone in some capacity along the whole continuum, from affordable all the way through market rate. But really, I feel like we have to get fundamentals down too. We have to make sure that we deal with the fundamentals and make sure our government is actually working and it's healthy and it's operating properly, so that we can do the vision as well. I also see that, one thing I feel very, proud of is I know how to surround myself with people who have vision, or people who are smarter than me in other things. I might have an idea of what I want downtown to look like, but I need people who know how to make that happen, to tell me what's possible, to tell us what's possible. And I feel like that is our work together to co-create. So I'm excited to work with dreamers, and to help facilitate those dreams. And it shouldn't just be up to one person to hold a vision for Portland. It needs to be all the dreamers, all the innovators, all the creators.
Amazing.
Yeah, and let's do it together. I was blown away by some of the things that I know that you've been thinking about for this area. That's what drew me to talking to you.
And I will say this, just fair disclosure. When I came to your team, and I had a whole deck of like, hey, this is how I feel like we can change the park blocks, for example, right? Which is a big spot here in the city that could use some love for the last 100 years. But instead of being turned away, you guys actually listened to it without knowing my background or anything. And there wasn't a special ticket where I got to sit with you, and they were like, start here, meet these groups in this community, and then get more involved in that. And there had to be a path there in the first place before I can come in and demand any of those things. And it was, within a year, I got involved in the reshaping of TIFF, and to be able to be in those conversations with other leaders that really had the same idea as far as like the way that we see Portland, right? That is not that's not a thing I take for granted, number one. But two, it was very much like, it got me on board to say, I like this. And I think there needs to be more of that. But again, that's my own feelings on it. The last thing I'll ask you, because we know what happens November 5th. I don't even know what the date is when elections happen, but you get elected, and we really collectively, a lot of us Latinos hope that you do. If that happens, great. But what happens if you're not elected?
That's not an idea that I entertain. I expect to be elected. So haven't thought about that.
I love it. I love it. Commissioner, thank you for your time.
Thank you.